Oh, I think we get started. It's 1 o'clock. So, hi, my name is Frida Sandberg, and I am the project manager for IAAP Nordic, which is a local chapter to International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And I would like to welcome you to this webinar that is founded by Erasmus+. And this webinar is automatically captioned, so please click on the CC button in the menu if you like to have captions. You can see a closed caption button, and you click on that, you can choose show subtitles. And please also use the microphone, the Q&A function if you have questions, but you can also raise your hand if you want to talk, and then we can turn on your microphone. So you have the Q&A function, or you can raise your hand if you have questions. And we also have a short break in the middle of the webinar, so you know that. Yes, and the topic for today is to talk about web accessibility in higher education and how to integrate web accessibility in ICT courses in higher education. And what we see is that web accessibility is gaining importance as a key competence for students to learn. And in this webinar, we will discuss the value of web accessibility training and also learn about tools to use when teaching web accessibility. And it's Funka and IAAP Nordic and partnering universities that will share insights from the development of teaching material. So the agenda for today is to talk about web accessibility in higher education and the training, presentation of the IWAC project. We will share general recommendations, an introduction on practical tools, presentation on online courses, MOOCs, presentation of cases, and then we'll end with a Q&A. And the speakers for today is Paul Boman, Director of Training, DQ Systems, Sara Källstrand, Research Strategies from Funka, Marina Rebaudo, Associate Professor in Computer Science from University of Genoa, Christopher Strobe, Accessibility Researcher at Stuttgart Media University, and Lisa Selvin, Lecturer in Computer and System Science from Mid-Sweden University. But before we start, I would like to talk a little bit, introduce you to IAAP and why we are working with this important topic. We are a not-for-profit membership-based organization for individuals and organizations that are focused on accessibility. And we are a member organization, have over 2,000 members in over 60 countries. And our mission is to define, promote, and improve the accessibility profession. We also have a global leadership council, and we are run by the members. And we're part of the UN initiative G-Free ICT, which is a global initiative for inclusive ICT. And we also work with certification within accessibility so that people can both show and prove that they have the knowledge about accessibility. And what we see is that web accessibility is usually not included in ICT program curricula in higher education. And as a result, many entry-level ICT professionals are unfamiliar with this subject. So there is a gap between the demand and supply. And this topic to integrate web accessibility in ICT courses is, of course, of extra importance for our members, because if we ever going to solve the accessibility problems, we need to make sure that the next generation of students working with ICT knows about accessibility. And that is the only way we can end up in an inclusive society. And we have a lot of member organizations that are searching for educated staff in the area of web accessibility, but they cannot find them. So they have to start educating themselves, and that costs a lot of time and money. So we as a member organization want to work with these questions to make sure that web accessibility will become a natural part of the university's education programs and a part of the curricula. And across the EU, there's an increasing demand for web accessibility skills. Anyone who works with digital interfaces, whether you're a developer or a procurer, editor, designer, you need to have such skills. And we have the European legislation, both the Web Accessibility Directive and the upcoming European Accessibility Act. And then even more people who work with the web will have to deal with accessibility issues, even if it's not part of their main or focus of the work, but this will apply to both public and private sector. Another driver of demand is also the growing insight that accessible websites are better for everyone. But there is not yet the corresponding supply of skilled professionals. So we, as a member organization, will continue to work with these questions to make sure that students at higher education get these skills before they enter the labor market. So that's why this is a very important topic for us at IAAP. I will now hand over to our first speaker, Paul Boman from DQ System. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. And I will go ahead and share my screen so that we can get this underway.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, perfect.
Coming across okay?
Yes, we don't see you, but if you want to turn on
Would you like to also see me on the side?
Yeah, that would be great.
Hold on, let me also do that. There you go.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Wearing a sweater on the beach, if you believe what you see in the video. All right, so my name is Paul Bowman. I am the Director of Training at DQ Systems, and I have been in the accessibility field for something like 20 years. I started in the higher education sector, and so I've seen accessibility come and go in a lot of different ways. My original work started when I was working with a project called WebAIM, which some of you are familiar with, and we created curriculum specifically for higher education, and we tried to promote teaching accessibility in the higher education sector. And then we published materials and put them out there. A lot of those materials are still there. And then I moved just to a different university and I began to teach in the United States at George Mason University. And I taught classes specifically in web accessibility. The whole class was accessibility focused. And that class ran for actually, at least the part that I taught, ran for 7 years. Every single semester. And it was not, in fact, it was a required part of the curriculum, which was nice. I now work at DQ Systems, where my focus is creating training materials for the enterprise sector mostly, but also anyone who is willing to receive training from us. And I happen to also teach on the side as an adjunct professor a course in web design and programming. And of course, since I have the expertise in accessibility, I integrate my knowledge of accessibility into that course. So that's a little bit of my background and how I've come to be on this panel and teaching or talking about accessibility in higher education curriculum. But I want to start, aside from just information about myself, I want to start by looking at what the goal really is. We want to be able to have accessibility be the default. So everywhere where there is a need for accessibility, we want that to always be present. We want any environment, whether it's digital or whether it's physical or anything like that, to have a default mode of being accessible. So if a person is blind, a person can't use their hands or whatever the situation is, there's always going to be an alternative for them or a way for them to access things directly. And if you look at all of the different places where accessibility can be important, I've listed just some and I'll read through them really quickly. Just the high level items of digital environments, physical environments, consumer products, and I listed hybrid environments as well, which could be some physical and some digital. And then customer service, instructional design, and printed materials. Those are the high level items. If you go under digital environments, you get websites, documents, email, social media, mobile apps, and physical environment would include architecture and transportation and several other things that I haven't listed here. With consumer products, you get things like kitchen appliances, mobile devices. And then with hybrid environments, we can talk about all of the, basically a combination of different things. So you can have mobile apps for public transportation. And an example of that would be where you can check to see when the next train is coming using a mobile app, or the next bus when that is coming, or check in for an airline for a flight using a mobile app. And then you can navigate through the physical space of the airport, let's say, or the physical space of a platform for a train. So it's a combination of several different things. And then I've listed virtual reality as another possibility under hybrid environments. So without going into every possible knowledge domain, you can already see that there's quite a lot that requires accessibility. Basically anything where human interacts with an environment, be it in a digital space or in a physical space, there's a need to design that environment to be accessible. Okay, and so the places where we can put accessibility in the curriculum in higher education are really, I wouldn't say everywhere, but anywhere where there's a human interface of any kind. That's where it needs to be accessible. And if you look at the roles then that would produce those environments, there are also quite a few. At the top, I've got business requirements, which would include program and project management, product owners and managers. These are the people who say, this is what we want to produce this. Here's the requirement that we want for what we perceive to be the market, or whatever the circumstance is. These are the people setting the goals overall. And then you have the people who receive that, all basically, which is everybody else here. The designers would then take the requirements, put them into a user experience design, create a user interface of some kind. You would have artists and designers of various kinds work with that. And then if it's a digital environment, you'd have the coders, the programmers. And then you're going to have content creators, which could be writers or interaction designers, or media producers. I didn't list that in the slide, but creating multimedia, videos or audios, things like that. That's on the creation side. And then in a different column, I've listed things like quality assurance. These are the people who test the things that were created. And then customer service, the people who have to deal with the customers or the users after it's been created. And so if a person has a question, they have to interact with a customer service representative in some way. And then you've got people who market this, people who sell it, and then the research that goes into the product creation and things like that. And again, looking at all the different roles that are involved in creating an environment, it's quite a lot. And so there are opportunities all over the curriculum. If you look at, for example, business requirements, this would be people who are maybe getting an MBA, a master's in business administration, or people who are not necessarily going to become accessibility experts really in any meaningful sense in a lot of cases, but they need to know that their products that they are going to manage and they're going to oversee would have an accessibility impact. And then you get down into the details with coders and programmers and content creators and things like that. All right, so higher education pathways to the end goal. So how, looking at all the different roles that we just talked about in the different environments where accessibility becomes important, how can we achieve that? And there are two main pathways, and I'm sure there are others, but the two main pathways I'm going to talk about would be, number one, to create a specialized accessibility program. So this would be, let's say, a graduate degree or an undergraduate degree or a certificate program within a university that wouldn't give a degree, but would end up with some sort of a credential at the end. And this would be specialized, meaning that the goal is to create specialization and good, deep knowledge within those individuals who go through the program, and they come out to be an accessibility expert at some degree or some level. And then option two would be to embed accessibility in the curriculum, in all relevant curricula. So that would be taking the idea of accessibility, and rather than specializing it for just a few people that would be interested in becoming experts, this is putting it everywhere. And with the second option, this would cover the broadest range, but it wouldn't make experts out of people. And so if I look at basically the verdict of what can be accomplished and the pluses and minuses, you could say, of these two approaches. If you look at option one of creating specialized accessibility programs, you have a small audience, which is on the negative side, but they would have strong accessibility skills, which is on the positive side. The reach, because of the small audience, would be limited, and the impact, in a sense, would be limited. Although those people, when they leave the higher education environment and go into the workforce, these are the people that would tend to fill the big roles in accessibility. So in a sense, they could have a large impact over other people who are, working with them. But the number of individuals who become experts is a small number. The hardest thing about this, the last bullet point under the verdict for option one, is it's difficult to keep a program alive. And this is something that I found in my research. This is years ago now, but when I did my doctoral research, I focused on accessibility in the higher education curriculum. And I looked at some programs that were designed specifically to produce experts and some that were basically option one, and then option two, some that embedded the accessibility in a curriculum of, where the focus was broader. It turns out that basically all of the programs that I was looking at, and even some that I didn't look at in detail, failed to be sustainable. They didn't stay alive. And so they might have a strong first year, high level of interest in the program. And then second year was much harder to recruit students, and third year, maybe they failed or something along those lines. That doesn't mean that they're all going to fail. It just means that the difficulty, you should just be aware of it. It also takes a very long time to create a specialized program. It takes years and years in a lot of cases. Whereas in option two, it can be easy to just add a lesson within a course or within a class, or to add an additional class. Adding classes takes more time in higher education. There are a lot of steps you have to go through. Putting a lesson within a class is easy because it's just an instructor's choice and they don't really have to ask anybody. So going over to the verdict on option two, a large audience, meaning that you have lots of students in lots of different programs, and so you're going to reach a lot of people. You're not going to teach them a lot in terms of accessibility knowledge, so they're not going to become accessibility experts, but they're going to learn something about accessibility, and that's going to carry over as they leave the program and go into their careers. And they're going to have to learn more, or they're going to have to rely on other people to do the work for them, but at least they will have been exposed to accessibility, and that's a key part of what it takes. That exposure and awareness actually goes pretty far, even though it doesn't complete the loop. Someone actually has to have the expertise, but it does go pretty far to making sure that it becomes part of the process. And then the last bullet point, easier to keep in a program. It's much easier to make sure that the program stays alive because it's not actually a program, or at least it's not a formal program that has to get approval and things like that. So it's easier to maintain. All right, current trends. So I'm encouraged that we are making progress, and I'll just give a quick anecdote. When I began teaching the class that I'm currently teaching, a class on web programming at Georgetown University, it's a small class, but I asked the class at the beginning if they had any experience with accessibility, and they kind of nodded their heads and said yes, but I wasn't sure that I believed them because a lot of people simply don't have that exposure. But then as I started to ask more questions, it turns out that a lot of them had already heard screen readers, they'd already seen some sort of a demonstration of accessibility. And I was a little bit surprised, but it's a good sign. It does mean that we are making progress. Now, my sample size was extremely small, less than 10 students in this particular class. The class I'm teaching currently is an elective, so it's not a required class. In fact, the class I teach is it's not like a computer science class. It happens to be part of a data analytics program. But that's also a key point to make. So in programs that might seem completely unrelated, so data analytics, who would think to teach web accessibility in a data analytics program? Well, of course I would, because that's what I do. But the point that I'm making is that you can embed accessibility in all kinds of programs that may not seem at first to be related, but they can be. And in fact, in previous semesters, I taught a course on data ethics, which again, maybe sounds like wouldn't apply to accessibility, but it's ethical, or it's ethical to make sure that you design for a broad audience, and especially for people with disabilities who may not be able to access things if you don't. So yeah, that's definitely part of data ethics. That was also an optional course that students could take within the data analytics program. So more people are becoming aware. That said, the bar is kind of low in a lot of ways. I was impressed that they'd even heard of it at all. But what we need to do is reach a point where we expect that. We want people to not only be aware, but to have basic knowledge of what to do. But some of the things that do make people aware are things like speech to text or text to speech technology, which is available on computers and available on mobile devices and things like that. Even on Zoom, like this very meeting that we're in has automated captions, and people have begun to get exposed to seeing captions on things. And then we have a lot of accessibility features on mobile devices and on laptop and desktop devices that are becoming more mainstream. And so we owe a lot of credit to companies, some of the big technology companies like Microsoft and Google and Apple, for embedding these accessibility features into their products. There's room for improvement in those, as they would admit themselves, but they've actually done a lot of work to just make sure that those technologies are available. All right, and then I'll wrap it up with just talking about the role of employers. So we can look at it as either from a top-down or bottom-up approach. And if we put it into, if we're talking about pressuring universities and pressuring teachers and instructors to put in a curriculum, and we're only talking amongst ourselves as higher education people, then that's kind of a bottom-up approach, and that will have an impact. But it's also important to recognize that what we do in higher education is market driven, whether we want to think about it that way or not. We like to think that in higher education that we're teaching just for the benefit of society, and to some extent that's true. But students don't go into programs where they don't have jobs at the end of them. And employers can apply a lot of pressure, and they can influence the courses and the programs in higher education for good. And so they can do things like list accessibility skills as required or desired when they put out job announcements. When we talked about IAAP certification, within a company, they can reward employees for getting certified and pay for the certification, give them a bonus, give them a promotion, things like that. And then again, on job announcements, they can list certification as required or desired. And then probably even more important, well, it's all important, but another aspect is to create accessibility specific roles. And so the first one I've listed would be like a chief accessibility officer of a large corporation. And that would be a pretty important role. Or a similar type of title would be vice president of accessibility. Then you get other things like accessibility program manager, accessibility technical lead, accessibility QA lead, accessibility center of excellence team, and a whole bunch of other roles that we can come up with. Just creating those roles in the first place does create a market for those skills, because you can't hire people. I mean, you can hire people and then train them. I mean, that's definitely something you can do. But all employers know that there's a cost to that. So it's better to have people who come with those skills, and you want those skills to come through higher education or other means too, but since we're talking about higher education. And then the last thing I've listed here is that we can create internships in collaboration with higher education. So have students come in, learn accessibility perhaps on the job as part of the internship. Maybe they're part-time. They could work with some of these other roles like an accessibility program manager or technical lead. And then it becomes part of their learning process in higher education as well as part of their employment. So this is just kind of a broad overview of how I see this working together. And again, the end goal, if I go back to the slide, sorry to flip so quickly, but the end goal is to create everything to be accessible by default. And if we're not putting that into the broadest number of programs possible, it's just simply not going to happen. So I think I'll pause there and maybe ask for some questions. Maybe I'll even stop sharing my screen. You can just see me here. So open it up to questions.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Yeah, you can just use the Q&A function to write your question or raise your hand. I'm happy to hear that you say that you see progress. That's good that we're making progress. I'm just wondering, do you see any differences between Europe and the US? How far we have come when it comes to like in the higher education and in the curricula?
Well, I don't teach in Europe per se, but I can't do a direct comparison. But just in the years that I've been working in accessibility, I have seen some interesting differences. So the US tends to be very requirements oriented. And so if it's not required, they don't do it type of thing. So if it's not a law, people will say, okay, well, I don't get in trouble if I don't do this, so it's not going to be a high priority for me. What I do see in Europe is generally a higher level of, at least in theory, willingness to do it. And so there's less of a resistance. If there's not a law, people won't go, okay, then I don't have to do it. That said, the level of implementation usually is higher in the US, just as my general observation. So even though the willingness in theory is often higher in Europe, the implementation is usually a bit better in America. Now that's a big, broad generalization that of course would not apply to a lot of specific cases, but that's my general observation. You can maybe tell me if you think that's true or not, but that's what I've seen.
Okay, we got a question from Gottfried Zimmerman. Would it be useful to have an IAAP certificate for teachers on accessible teaching and accessible learning materials?
That's a good question. So the certifications that exist now are basically for people who are going to create accessible contents. So whether it's digital content, like web or documents. If we certify people as instructors, there would be a different kind of, different set of requirements. As to whether it's a good idea, I'd actually have to think about that a little bit. As like, because my thought process would be whether it would be successful or not, because it's an expensive process to go through creating a certification. So I don't know from a business standpoint, because unfortunately we have to look at it that way, whether it would be successful in terms of cost benefit analysis. But in terms of having instructors aware of what they need to do, it would be fabulous. It's an interesting idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have another question from Sarah. Do you have advice on how to start incorporating accessibility into curriculum as someone who isn't an instructor?
So someone who isn't an instructor?
Yeah. Do you have advice on how to start incorporating accessibility into curriculum as someone who's not faculty instructor?
Okay. So basically how to influence the curriculum even though you're not teaching it yourself. So there are a few different directions you can go. First, you can, well, talk to the heads of the departments would be one thing. The sad part is it's a very person-to-person type of communication that has to happen. There's not a lot of control that you have globally over higher education because everyone's doing their own thing. So that's it. You can advocate, but you have to reach out to a lot of individual people. In the United States, you can, there are basically accreditation requirements. And so if you can convince the accreditors to put accessibility as a requirement into the accreditation process, meaning, so if you have, let's say, a program in instructional design, if you require that the program teach something about accessibility to be accredited, then it will absolutely become part of the curriculum because they want to be accredited, because if it's not accredited, no students are really going to want to be in the program because you don't want to be in the or non-accredited program. So talking to accreditors, that is also a very long, very, very political process, but you can advocate that way. But a lot of it is honestly reaching out to individuals, because going through a long political process is very discouraging, but it can have the biggest impact, but it can be very slow and you may not win. You know, they may decide not to do it. But if you reach out to the heads of departments and individual instructors, you're not going to have universal success, but you will have success with some of them.
Thank you. Let's see, there's another question here. There are very few people in universities able or interested in teaching accessibility. How can that be changed? From Mike.
You know, that there's an underlying assumption that people don't care in kind of in that question, and that's sort of true. But what I find is that when people learn about accessibility and they truly understand it, like I'll give demonstrations, have them listen to a screen reader, have them use some assistive technologies, and it doesn't usually take much for a person to get it and to understand why it's important. So yes, people resist doing extra work. That's true. I mean, we're human, and who wants to do extra work, especially if we're not getting paid more to do it, right? So that's a big problem. But the idea that people don't care is true until they realize why they should. That's usually the case. So in the vast majority of cases, people do care. They just don't know that they care yet.
Yes. Okay, yes, thank you very much. I think we should continue. And if you have, perhaps you will stay, Paul, are you staying there?
Sure.
So So I think we should continue to talk a little bit more about the project and the output from the project. And if you have more questions, please use the Q&A function, and we will have some questions in the end of the webinar. So I will continue to share my screen. Okay. Yes, thank you, Paul. And I'm now going to present a little bit about and talk a little bit about the project IWAC, which stands for Integration of Web Accessibility Courses in ICT Programs. And this is a collaborative project with university focused. And we started this project in October 2019, and we'll end it now in January 2022. And it's a cross-sectorial focus in this project. We have 5 partners in 3 countries. And the partners are is Funka, Mid Sweden University, Stuttgart Meda University, University of Genoa, and we have worked together to address this lack of teaching on the subject, and we also have learned a lot from each other in the project. And what we wanted to do is in this project was to promote a more practical approach to integrating web accessibility in higher education. So in this project, we have developed a starter kit for courses in web accessibility. And this kit includes both online courses and case study material, as well as guidance and recommendations on how you can develop and adapt your own courses. So we want to provide universities with practical tips and tools for introducing web accessibility into the curricula of all relevant educational programs. And we also want to encourage the exchange of experiences and lessons learned. So the aim with this project is to develop hands-on support for teachers, create and test innovative learning material, and support and promote curricula development. And there are 5 main outputs from the project. There are recommendations for curriculum development, a handbook for teachers that are new to the subject of web accessibility, a handbook, a guide with examples of good teaching practices from universities, and online courses, MOOCs, introducing the topic of web accessibility, and also case studies to be used in teaching for a deepened understanding of the topic. So these are the 5 main outputs. And all this material in the project will be published on our website, and it will be open for everyone to access. I can post the link in the chat, so you have that. Everything we produce in the project will be on our webpage, iwapnordic.org/project/IWAC. Yes, so that was a little short introduction to this project. And now I will hand over to Sara Källström from Funka that will share some general recommendations from the project.
Thank you very much. So before we get into the details on the open educational resources that we have developed, I would just like to present a few recommendations, general recommendations on how you can integrate web accessibility into the courses. So when Paul was talking earlier about the two options of either educating specialists or generalists, really to make sure that everyone working in ICT has at least a knowledge, a notion of web accessibility. In this project, we are looking at the second option. So how can we really ensure that web accessibility is seen as a core competence for all persons working with ICT to know about? So a few of the recommendations that we are developing in this project has to do both with motivations for getting started. We all know that teachers have a lot of things on the table. So why get into web accessibility can be seen as something, just an additional burden. And then we have a few recommendations around curriculum development, about teaching strategies and methodologies, and then also for the general capacity for delivery and design, I should say, of courses. So starting with the motivations, why should you do this? Well, it's for the students, of course. So why would students want to learn about web accessibility? Well, first of all, they will gain a broader level of skills and improve the employability. So what it's important, well, what we think is important here is that web accessibility is not just a theoretical study. It's not about knowing the concepts. It's really about applying it in very concrete and specific situations that you will learn about and that you will be able to apply in any professional context, but especially working in ICT. So it's both about being able to reach wider audiences, and also, and this is perhaps a bit, I don't know, political, but we have a strong belief in the fact that accessibility is also improving products and services for everyone, not just for the persons that have a higher need of accessibility at one level. And then employers have, of course, a wish to employ persons with broader skills in general, but specifically, and this is also starting in Europe, employers are now looking for persons that know about the web accessibility requirements and legislation, because even though in the US there's a much stronger emphasis on obligations, and in Europe this is also starting now in the recent years with the recent legislation for public organizations, but also the new and upcoming much broader legislation on accessibility. So one thing, part of the employability, is to have professionals that know about the obligations, but it's also about this broader level of skills to be able to employ persons that have the capacity of doing online services and products and apps that have a broad outreach and that are both attractive and usable for the wider audience, regardless of the abilities of the persons that are going to use the products. And also, both to have a broader level of skills and to have a better chance of getting employed, you also have a better way to make a contribution to society, both in terms of inclusion and participation, but also to actually do products and services that can serve a larger number of persons in a better way. So then this translates into the motivation for teachers. The teacher has an obligation to teach topics needed in the professional world. So this is the obligation part of it. The main role of the teachers is really in the ICT education to prepare students for the professional world and for anything that they will encounter. And they will encounter the obligations, and they will also encounter the wish of employers to have persons that know about web accessibility. So then it becomes sort of a must for the teachers also to keep on top of developments and teach students what they need to know. But it's not only about an obligation, it's really about professional development, both in terms of the content, because this is a world web accessibility is actually, it's not a static topic. There's quite a lot of developments going on, and so there's a need to keep on top of the developments, both for research and also for the teaching. And then there is the additional professional development in terms of the teaching methods, because there's one thing to talk about web accessibility on a theoretical side, but you also need to walk the talk and to be able to teach web accessibility in an accessible way. So the skills that you learn as a teacher, both in terms of the content of web accessibility and also the actual how you do it in practice, is something that can be useful in a lot of contexts. So moving on to curriculum development, the first recommendation we have here is really to make sure that the modules on web accessibility connect to other ICT courses. Because if we want to make sure that web accessibility is part of a core set of skills that all ICT students and ICT professionals will carry with them in the professional world, then it needs to be, the connection needs to be made also in the minds of students, that this is really not something that is theoretical and that I do on the side and then I have my real skills elsewhere, but it's really integrated in the core professional skills that they will learn at universities. So the connection goes both ways. The course subjects, whether it's design or development, needs to talk about web accessibility as a core part of the curriculum. And then also the specialized really web accessibility courses need to make a connection to the courses and the topics where the students will apply this knowledge. And in relation to this, it's important then to include both the theory, so who are the users, what are the user needs, what is it all about, and also the practice. How do you go about making accessible apps and websites? And in this curriculum development, you can make use of existing material. There are both existing material for online courses on basic concepts in the theory, and there are also case studies that can be used. So when you do both theory and practice, make use of existing material that we have developed both in our project and elsewhere. And we will be talking more about the materials that we have been producing in the project later on after the break. And the next area of recommendation is concerning teaching methods. So the first recommendation is, of course, to walk the talk and to apply accessible teaching methods, both in terms of the materials that you develop and hand out to students, and also in the way that the teaching is delivered in classrooms or online. And this can, of course, be a challenge if you're not so used to it, but we have also developed materials that can be used for this, so that you know what you need to know about making accessible teaching. And another recommendation regarding teaching methods is to provide practical assignments at different levels. So you don't need to teach all the theory first and then let the students apply it at the end, but really the connection and the reflexes on making making accessibility work in practice needs to be there from the beginning. So we have examples of this in the MOOCs that we have developed for this project, where already at the start, when we are teaching the theoretical concepts about accessibility, there are small practical assignments that makes the students make the connection between theory and what it means in practice. And another recommendation of teaching methods is to involve end users of different abilities. So web accessibility is not theoretical, it's about real people. How can we make sure that everybody can be equally included in the digital environment? And the best way to make students realize what it's all about is also to let them interact with end users of different abilities. This can be everything from a lecture to actual joint projects, depending on how much time and resources we have for it. But it's really important to make this connection to ensure that the students understand that it's not just, again, it's not about theory, it's really about the practice. And the last set of recommendations that we are developing is about the capacity for delivery. So how can you make sure that you at your university has the ability to design and deliver courses on web accessibility and to integrate them in the ICT curricula? So one of the recommendations we have is to create an internal network for mutual support. And this goes back to the issue that you need to have connections between web accessibility modules and ICT, other ICT courses. And if you create an internal network where you meet up at a regular interval to discuss common issues around web accessibility, it helps both to raise awareness of web accessibility as a topic among colleagues, and it also creates these connections where you can discuss common issues and help to find common solutions. And then related to how you can also involve end users in the teaching, a good way is to connect with end user organizations because they have the knowledge about what it actually means in practice for the members. And they can also usually be quite helpful with interacting with students in courses. And the last recommendation we have concerning capacity for delivery is to make use of the accessibility community. IAAP has a lot of resources and materials that can also be used in teaching. So there is both the possibility to become a member. There are a lot of IAAP members that are educational institutes. And this is also a very good way to connect with the professional world, as the accessibility community in IAAP has connections with everyone working on accessibility. So I'd just like to end this very brief presentation and recommendations with the statement that web accessibility is really relevant to all ICT students. And even though there is, there are good reasons also to educate specialists to really to get out and to have the broadest impact. The best way we believe in this project is to integrate web accessibility in all ICT curricula, at least to some level. So thank you very much. See if we have any questions.
I think we leave the questions to the end of the webinar, and we have now take a 10 minutes break. So if we get back at 2 o'clock. So a short break, and then we save all the questions to the end of the webinar when we heard about from the other speakers as well. Okay, see you soon. So welcome back. And thank you, Sarah, for sharing those recommendations. And now I will hand over to Marina Ribaudo, who's going to talk about the handbook and the guidelines. So welcome, Marina.
Good afternoon. So I will share my screen.
Yes.
And my presentation. So, shall I start, Frida?
Yes.
Okay. So, good afternoon. I am Marina Ribaudo from the University of Genova, involved in this IWAC project, and I will tell you some details about one of our first deliverable, which is the handbook we produced during the first year of the project. And then I would like also to share with you some experience I had together with my students, because I'm teaching web development. And therefore, thanks to the IWAC project, I had the opportunity of introducing accessibility in my course in the last 2 years. So there's not much room in my course for accessibility because there are very many different topics I have to cover, but I've tried, and you will see the result of this experience. And as already pointed out by Sarah, we are in the option 2 as presented by Paul Bowman, because we do not have specific accessibility course, but we try to put some accessibility topics within others ICT courses. So let me start with the handbook, which is indeed probably the first deliverable of the project. And you can see here the cover of the handbook. The title of its handbook is Handbook on Web Accessibility for Teachers. And indeed, this targets university professors that want to stimulate somehow the students accessibility. And each chapter, which is, I think, very important, has links to external resources for those readers that want to have major details about the content of the handbook. So in the next slide, I will present you some sentences taken from the handbook itself, just to give you an idea of what we did during the first years of the project. So the idea is that web accessibility should be practiced as an ongoing program, not just as an ad hoc activities. And this is something that, I mean, can be accessibility by default, like Paul Bowman told us in the first relation, because we should think of accessibility from the early stage of design. I'm used to say accessibility by design, but I really liked accessibility by default. Okay, this of course has a cost, because we need to put extra activities in our, while we're preparing, developing an online service and mobile apps or software in general, but this cost is compensated because there is also an increase in the reputation. So this is another sentence taken from the handbook that says that inclusive and accessible design will attract more customers and generate a positive image of the company. Of course, and this is a problem, this is the problem we have discussed so far, usually accessibility is not taught in ICT education. And therefore, there is a general lack of expertise among businesses and public organizations, because we do not really teach accessibility to our students. But this lack of knowledge should not be confused with a lack of advancement in the field, because activities have been done in recent years. So, and part of the book explains which is the research done in this context. So I have here just some pointers to the book. The book explains also which are the very last accessibility guidelines produced by IIIC consortium. And so the interested reader can read something in our handbook and then find more information on the provided links, either on the guidelines or on models that they can be used in order to employ really accessibility during development. So this is another page which is referred in the handbook. For the teachers, or from the point of view of the teachers, probably the most interesting part of the handbook is that related to example on how accessibility can be applied in teaching and learning. And therefore, I've pointed out, were extracted from the book, some of these examples. So the idea is that when we have a class, we can think of giving students an assignment to analyze an apps that they use for their everyday life, so that the students are challenged in explore how the apps align with inclusive design and whether the apps support the needs of a person with specific user needs. So this is one of the suggestions, one among the many suggestions that you can find in the book. And I put another one, which is called empathic modeling. And here the idea, the proposal for teachers is to involve in simulating disabilities to give students an opportunity to experience day-to-day situation from the perspective of a person. And the example in the handbook is from the perspective of a person who is blind or visually impaired. The idea is that show students how it is difficult to use the web with the help of a screen reader. And this is what, when students see and listen to a screen reader reading the text in a web page, it is what we call an eureka moment. So they really understand this issue. Okay. The last suggestion I've copied, but there are very many in the handbook, is that of organizing hackathon. And hackathon in this concept are called hackability. And the idea is to organize events in which students acting as designer or developers work together with persons with disabilities, with elderly people, because I mean, disabilities can be permanent, but they can be also temporary. And in our life, we have already experienced some moment in which we couldn't do something because of specific situation. And also with children, with young people, to co-design application services and based on personalized solutions that can improve people's lives. So the book has many others of this example, and these are just suggestions for teachers so that they can put in practice accessibility activities with their classes. Then the books also provides basic guidelines to help lectures making the teaching material more accessible, like Sarah told us, and also good practice for teaching accessibility. Here I have a screenshot of one page of the book. I do not pretend you can see. There are list of suggestions, and I highlight one. It's the rule number 5, because it is related to alternative tests, because we know that for images and not test content, we should provide alternative tests. And a short alternative test is used for simple images, while longer tests are used for more complex images. And I've decided to highlight this suggestion because this is something I did with my students, and I will do with my students in the next week. So this is one of the practical activities I've already done and I will do with my students, because I would like to share with you some experience. So as I told you, I started talking about web accessibility because of the IWAC project. And so now, after 2 years, I have something to show, because I mean, students do not know the issues, but when they know the issues of accessibility, I think they are quite interested about that. So let me show what happened. I I do not have a big experience, I have a small and short experience, but let me show you some of the results. So one of my students decided to do the final project on this topic. And so my course in the third year, so this is a bachelor degree, so it's final project in the bachelor degree. And so the title of her final project is Universal Design and Web Accessibility. And after discussing some background materials, she decided to make an analysis of the accessibility level of some website, which is something we can do with our students. They learn how to do assessment and they can do this in practice. So she used the self-assessment guide provided by AGI, which is an Italian agency on Agenzia per l'Italia Digitale. So they provide a checklist. So she used this checklist to assess the website of our university, the intranet of our university, and also the websites of a classmate who developed a website for a bachelor degree. So this was my first final project on accessibility. We had fun, the students learned a lot, and she was really happy of doing this. And then we had a second example, just to give you something concrete, of another student that decided to work on alt test. And let me read the sentence taken from his document. So, web pages contain many images, but sometimes it might be annoying for the developer to label all them properly, since it is time consuming. As a consequence, the web is full of content that does not satisfy this simple accessibility requirement. So what did we decide to do for this project is to analyze the quality of alternative tests. And so we took some sample of images and asked the student in the class to evaluate the quality of their description. But for each image, we proposed 5 different descriptions, but only one was human authored, so it was written by a human. The other 4 were automatically generated because there are many artificial intelligence vision engines in the market that have been proposed in order to detect objects in images and recognize scenes or images. So we decided to use these automatic generated captions and to ask students to compare their quality. And it was interesting to see the results, but as you might expect, the human authored caption outperformed those generated by AI algorithms. There is still a lot to do in order to help developers to use this tool for automatic labeling, which is time consuming. So not all the developers think to put alt test, which is so fundamental for visually impaired students, but it's not always there. So these are 2 examples of outcomes of the IWAC project done with the students that currently this year attended the MOOC. The MOOC will be presented in the next presentation, but yesterday I connected to the MOOC in order to get some feedback from them, because there is a final survey in which they're asked to express what they liked more. So I took these 3 sentences. These are written in English by students, so I was surprised about that, but they replied to the survey in English. And so let me read with you. Unfortunately, I cannot see everything. Okay. So I like the overall objective to increase awareness. This is something we already heard in the first presentation. So increase awareness and exposure about the different ways web can be used, facing the difficulties and providing solutions. So another student said it was eye-opening, and the practical exercises, so it is very important to do not only theory, but also practice, were the most interesting part. It was fun to put myself under similar conditions to the ones who actually have this kind of disabilities, and it helped me to better understand how they feel when browsing the web. And finally, I think one another important feedback is that one student say, I understand the difficulties that some people have in using devices. And I'm pleased in my small way to be able to do something for them by making the websites I make accessible. So these are feedbacks after the MOOCs. And I would like to conclude with the slides of another student that decided to do his final project on this topic. So a Turing web accessibility, legislation and examples. And these are his conclusions, which are also my conclusions. So I have presented the issues of accessibility, which is still an unsolved problem. I've also presented an exercise for students because I think that us as future developers are responsible of the design and the development of digital services without barriers. So to conclude, if the overall goal of the IWAC project is to increase the exposure and awareness of accessibility among young ICT students, well, I think that we are in the right path. So we started, and I hope we can do much more in the years to come. I hope we can create the network among colleagues and to do even much more. And so this concludes my presentation. I probably was 1 minute late, so I apologize for this.
Thank you very much, Marina. And we take questions in the end.
At the end.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will stop sharing.
Yeah, and I will hand over to Christophe that will talk more about the MOOCs.
Exactly.
Hello, I'm Christoph Strobbe, and I will soon share my screen. It's a little bit of difficulty the first time I tried this. Now it should work. So, I'm Christoph Strobbe of the Hochschule der Medien, or Stuttgart Media University in Germany. I'm going to present, talk about the MOOCs that we've developed in the project. As we know, there's still a lot of work to do with regard to integrating accessibility into ICT curricula. Just one example, in the beginning of the project, we did some sort of survey, at least here in Germany, to find out how many higher education institutions that offer ICT curricula actually also teach a course in accessibility. And for example, just looking at the state of Baden-Württemberg, where Stuttgart is located, we found that 29 out of the 59 higher education institutions actually offered an IT-related curriculum, but only 2 of those offered courses focusing on accessibility. So one was the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, and the other one was, well, HDM, which is why we are in this project. So this would be a nice, as a unique selling proposition in a way, if there were more accessibility, more awareness of accessibility in the general population. But that's not really the place where we want to be on the global level, especially if you want to make accessibility business as usual, and even more if legislation requires that we make accessibility business as usual. So one of the things we're doing in the MOOC project, in addition to creating a handbook and recommendations, etc., is also creating online courses that can also run as MOOCs. So we want to create, well, initial goal was to create 2 or 3 model online courses. Eventually we settled upon 2 that would basically present core web accessibility skills and knowledge. And that would require 2 or 3 weeks each to study. It was also important that the content of these courses would be, or the courses as such, would be either reusable as is, or that they would allow reassembly. So all the content from these courses will also be made available as open educational resources under the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license. We want to this course to be able to run on a widespread platform, and also to be suitable for a flipped classroom approach. That's also basically how we've tested the courses that we developed. And obviously, since we want to promote accessibility in ICT curricula, the content in these courses should, of course, meet the requirements in WCAG 2.1 level AA. So one course is called Introduction to Web Accessibility from User Perspective, and it was developed by the Swedish partners in the project, namely Funka and Mid-Sweden University. So far, we've run it on the Moodle platform that we have here at HDM, or Stuttgart Media University. So the English version has been used also by Mid-Sweden University students, and a German translation has been used by students of our own at HDM. Intertime translation is available and will soon be made public on the Italian e-learning platform EduOpen. It's currently in one sort of demo server and will then be transferred to the public server. So what does this course consist of? Basically 4 units, 2 units in week 1 that focuses on accessibility for people with motor impairments, and the second unit focuses on cognition, whereas week 2 has a unit on vision and a unit on hearing. Basically, if you want to see the should not be able to see the German version of the web accessibility course on one of the platforms that we have here at AGM, and the English version on a Moodle platform, which looks a bit different, so I can see the units. It's not just text, it also has practical activities and a quiz at the end of every unit, for example. So going back to the presentation. And the Italian translation, which just a brief screenshot that shows on the left some kind of course index with the items in Unit 1 and the introductory text on the right. Sorry. So that's the first MOOC, and the second MOOC is a bit different because it's not aimed at students but at lecturers. So it's about accessible learning and teaching. And it was created by HDM and the University of Genoa. It also consists of 2 weeks that require 2 to 3 hours of study per week. And it's also available on HDM's Moodle platform in English and in German. The German version has actually also been used by HDM lecturers and staff. Had around 20-25 participants in that course just last month. And the English version will also be used later by University of Genoa and Mid-Sweden University. So what do we have in that specific course? We have basically divided into 2 weeks. The first week is about, we call it understanding inclusive teaching practices, which contains some motivational content, so to speak. So perspective of lecturers, perspective of students, so information about student demographics, on students with disabilities, some content about legislation, but not exhaustive. And we used some day in the life stories that we created in the MOOC project. So these are persona-like documents to give an impression about, this kind of challenges that people with specific disabilities face in daily life. And the second week is then a bit more practical. We call it creating inclusive teaching practices, and that has items such as one focusing on document accessibility, one on video accessibility. There's even a caption exercise in there. There's also something about LMS accessibility, which also discusses some basic tests, how a lecturer can get some at least initial idea of how accessible a MOOC platform is, also a learning platform is. And and also contains a few more day-in-the-life stories. So these are, so can give you a brief peek at this course on the Moodle platform that we have here at HDM. It also includes a few forum steps in order to activate learners, of course, or basically lecturers in this case. One interesting thing that we found when we ran this course last month is that based on previous experience in the MOOCA projects, in which we also created courses, we thought, okay, including videos, for example, is rather important. And then I heard from 2 lecturers who participated in the course that they said, well, those videos, even if I run them at twice the normal speed, it is still slower than reading a transcript. So I'd rather have a transcript than video, for example, which was for me an unexpected outcome based on previous experiences. So returning to the slides again, I would just like to present the next steps with regard to the courses in the IWAC project. So of course we will, at the end of every course, there is some kind of survey to get feedback from participants, and we will use that to revise the courses to the extent that's necessary. The translations, the German translations already exist. Translation into Swedish and Italian will also be created and made available as open educational resources. We are actually also setting up another Moodle instance at AGM to host the IWAC courses, and which actually allow a self-registration process, because that is not possible with the instance that we've been using so far. And that brings me basically to the end of my presentation. So that leaves a few more minutes then that we can use for questions and comments.
Thank you, Christoph. See if we have any question, otherwise we save them for later. Yeah, I think we save them for later and continue with Lisa Selvin. So thank you very much for showing us that, Christoph, and Lisa can present the cases, and then we have a question and answer in the end of the webinar.
Yes, thank you. My name is Lisa Selvin, and I work at the Mid-Sweden University in Sundsvall in Sweden. It was good light here before, but now it's already dark outside. So, but you can see my screen, I hope. Yeah, the case-based training material that we mentioned here before is one of the deliveries. And the purpose is to teach how to apply the theoretical knowledge and competencies related to web accessibility in the different professional contexts. And the objective is to give the students an opportunity to put the theory into practice and stimulate reflection and discussions about these kind of cases. And we have created 4 cases, or in the project we did 3, and then we have a guest contribution with the 4th case. And I will go through them, the 4 of them, pretty brief, and then go a bit more into this case 1 that I have tested with my students. Yeah, the first case was about done in a group of students, or it is supposed to be a pretty broad exercise that you can run in different teams or student groups. And it's more about designing a customer journey. And the case is about designing a customer journey for getting a new passport. And a customer journey is like a timeline where you and where you can see all the different interactions points between a user and the police in this case. And then you can see all the interaction points, both physical and digital, and also like feelings during this journey. It's from the moment where you realize that you need a new passport to where you actually get your passport. So what we did in this, they did it in several steps. First, they created the customer journey from their own perspective, students' perspective. Most of them had actually done this in Sweden. And then we asked them to adapt the journey to different users with different disabilities. And in step 3, we introduce personas and also a true story scenario from a blind person trying to get the passport. And they are asked to adjust the customer journey again. So I'll tell you a bit more about this later. The second case that Marina mentioned, that she and her colleagues have come up with, is to work with alternative text in images. So this is on another level case, to make complex images and mathematical formulas accessible, like, for example, diagrams. And as she said, they will discuss this issue and how hard it is to write this kind of text, and possibly also how the AI are doing it. And then its students will try to will receive 5 images and try to describe them, and they will receive 5 descriptions and try to reproduce the content and compare it and discuss what they find. And the third case by Christoph and his colleagues in Stuttgart is about setting up a computer to users with different disabilities. And this exercise is to get an introduction to various types of disabilities and to the assistive technologies and compensation strategies required by these disabilities. They get some of these in the MOOCs as well, where you can have simulators and learn about what kind of tools is good for different kind of disabilities. But in this exercise, they will also try to have 2 different disabilities needs and combine them and see and set up a computer to work for both of them and accomplish some tasks like looking for a university to apply on a website or finding a new smartphone. So they will see that this can be a bit challenging. And then the fourth case, that is a contribution from Alena in Spain, is to use development skills. This is for web developers, to book a flight as a user with significant blindness. That she experienced that it's really hard to use flight booking sites, and she's developed some workarounds to actually use them. And these workarounds could be really good to know for web developers, so that if they experience this themselves, they will probably start thinking about this when they develop similar websites themselves. So the first case, the customer journey, that my colleague and I tested this with, it was 39 students, and we did it in a 3-hour workshop, and the course was in human-computer interaction. And the students are from different programs. It's computer engineering and industrial engineering and management, and also industrial engineering design students. So what we did when they started to create the customer journey with from their own perspective, we were listening to what they did, and they also presented it for us, and we could see that they were really into their norms, and we could see many, for example, many students got by car to the police station to pick up the passport, and they didn't think of people going by bus or bicycle or things like that. So what we tried to do during the workshop was picking up these kind of norms that we saw, and then write some cards for them to, in the next step, they had to design for non-norms, and that could be anything like left-handed people or bicyclists or persons with dyslexia, and of course the disabilities like wheelchair users or blindness. And when we did that, we realized that they had pretty many prejudice about people with disabilities and didn't know much about these users. So we had prepared a real case scenario from Twitter, a user that is a user on Twitter that is very good at sharing his experience as a blind person, and he tried to educate all of us to be better at accessibility. So after that, they were asked to redesign their customer journey. And some results from the tests that we saw from the teacher perspective, we saw that customer journeys is a good tool as well. It's not about accessibility by itself, but it's good to combine with accessibility. It's good to widen our perspective and see the whole user journey. And it was clear for us that many students were not used to think outside the norms, and it made them clear for them as well. And a lot of students, as I said, had prejudices about various disabilities, and for example, they didn't know how does a blind person go to a police station. They had a lot of questions about how does it work. So we find that personas and real case scenarios, or the best would be to have actually someone to interview about this. And that was helpful. And this diagram here shows where we asked them some questions in the end, if they think this was a valuable knowledge, if they think it's going to be valuable for the future professional roles. And they really, they think it's a good knowledge. And as Marina called it, a eureka moment. I think they had that when they saw this Twitter story about how it was in real life for a blind person to go to the police station. So we learned a lot, and we think that could make similar cases and with other personas, and develop this further as well. So the result of this case studies will be a description, a bit more detailed description that a teacher can use directly in their classes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marina. So now it's open for questions, and I think all the speakers can answer. So let's see, we have one question here. Lower level courses curriculum are driven by accrediting organization requirements, whereas higher level courses curriculum are driven by academic personal research interest. Also, teachers do not want to teach practical aspects they are not experts in. How have you addressed either of these issues? Who wants to answer? Does Sarah want to answer, or Marina?
Oh, I can just a quick answer from my side. So for me, IWAC was the opportunity to learn something new and to try to introduce in my course. So it's, I think we need somehow a reason for adding things we don't know, because it's very hard for us to teach our courses, but really for me, it was the opportunity to learn something, to apply something. I'm teaching in a bachelor degree, so it's not really a master course. So I already learned the basics, but what I really liked is that I realized that for students, it was interesting, even if I'm teaching to programmers. So it's something they did not know, and now they're happy they know something more. So I think there is room in all ICT courses really to do something very basics, just to open their mind to this topic, which already is not covered. And so it's something that also I think we heard from the first speaker. So also professors do not teach this because they do not know this, but it's not necessary to be super expert to start. I mean, to start. Then if we want to do a specific course, yes, we need to work hard, but just to start, I think our MOOCs or reading some documentation, our handbook might be a good starting point.
Thank you. How much have you reused from the MOOC resources in the MOOCs?
Right, so this question comes from Mike Wald from the University of Southampton, who was in the MOOCA project. So from the MOOCA project, we reused the so-called day in the life stories, which are persona-like descriptions. And we used something from one of the courses that's called, let me just check again. So an interview with Professor Grammar Earl about, well, his perspective on accessible teaching. That these are the things we reused from the MOOCAP resources.
Okay, let's see. Do we have any other questions? It's also okay to raise your hand, and we can turn on your microphone if you have any questions. Yes, we have a question from Ruth. Let's see.
Hi. So I just recently took over a web course that we have, and accessibility is littered throughout it. And actually, this maybe talks a little bit about what the previous question was how do you get people interested in it? Well, I took over this course and I read and I realized just how much I didn't know about it before I took over the course. And I actually found it really, really interesting. So I think giving someone a little hook into it makes it interesting. But my question that I had was, I've been reading a lot about kind of disability simulators and things like that. And there seems to be quite a lot of mixed views on this about whether they're a good thing or a bad thing. Because one thing I found was, although I got quite excited about it, I didn't necessarily feel that all the students really understood the importance of accessibility and what we were trying to teach them. And I thought possibly using some kind of simulator would help. But as I'm reading more and more about it, I'm less and less certain. And I was wondering if any of you guys have had any experience with this and what your views on using these kinds of simulators are, or having activities that simulate them.
One of the universities I'm prepared to answer, but I think in one of the MOOCs that we have an exercise that does not really necessitate use of a simulator, but also puts you in the position of having to, for example, go around websites without using the mouse, just tabbing around, these kinds of exercises. The problem with these simulators is that they are of varying quality. So you really need to know it quite well if you're going to get into the use of those. So I don't know if Paul perhaps had a more experience with using them, but in the project, we didn't really include them in the material that we developed.
Just one thought that I have, going back in the past, I've created actual simulations using logic that was trying to fake it to create a simulated user experience with, let's say, a screen reader, or a simulated user experience with a cognitive disability. I think those had a low level of success to teaching what we actually wanted to teach. But one thing that I think does make a big difference is having someone who is a skilled, let's say if we're talking about screen readers, having someone who is a skilled screen reader user get up and give a demonstration showing, here is how I actually use a screen reader for real. And in my case, I'm skilled enough to do that in a presentation. I'm not a blind person, so I'm not skilled to that extent as a blind person would be for everyday use. But giving a presentation, I'm definitely skilled enough and for testing purposes. So I can get up, give a demonstration, use the screen reader, and navigate, and they get the idea. And then I say, okay, now I put a list of keyboard shortcuts up on the screen, and I'll say, it's your turn, and I'll give them a task to do. So this is not simulating per se, it's actually trying to do it for real, with the caveat that they're not actually blind, and they're learning for the first time how to use a screen reader. But even people who are blind have a first time using a screen reader, so it's, in that sense, it's kind of real-ish, if not completely real. But just giving them a competent demonstration followed by hands-on experience to do it, I find is a good combination.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? No. Okay. Then I will say thank you very much, Paul Boman, for attending this webinar, and thank you to all partners in the project for speaking today. And thank you for participants. And all the materials will be found at the IAAP Nordic website. And if you have questions regarding project, you can contact me and I will distribute it to the right person within the project. So thank you very much, and have a good afternoon, everyone. So bye-bye. Thank you very much.